arrive at the infirmary will be from the mainland north area of Halifax, where there are no other alternatives. That area has grown very rapidly and now has about 100,000 people living there. The Chief of Emergency Medicine at Capital Health, Dr. Ross, recently said in a newspaper article that other hospitals allow for triage that then redirects people who are less urgent to other clinics in the community. The Corpus-Sanchez report, Mr. Speaker, in addition to that, recognized that the improvement we need in our healthcare system begins by focusing on health services that are available in the community. It recommends the immediate establishment of a primary care leadership task force involving the department and DHAs. My question, Mr. Speaker, to the Minister, has this task force been instructed to look at the development of 24/7 clinics outside of the downtown core to accommodate those areas of HRM that are rapidly growing?
The Honourable the Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And yes, it has, as it has looked at other locations within the province that require this other level of service, one that, of course, emergency rooms and those people doing the assessments can forward those people to the correct level of care.
The Honourable the Member for Halifax Clayton Park on our final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, as usual, everything is moving very slowly with this government. There is a solution to ER wait times, and it is community-based 24/7 medical clinics. It's been discussed here for years. The government knows it, and we know it, and Corpus-Sanchez has mentioned it, and yet it still remains undone. In terms of citing a clinic, my final question to the Minister is, will the Minister consider using the mainland North Clayton Park area as a pilot site for the establishment of a 24/7 medical clinic, which would clearly alleviate pressures at the Halifax Infirmary emergency?
The Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, what I would do is entertain any request from any region in the province that is looking at setting up a primary care clinic. Mr. Speaker, there's always the challenge of the 24 hours, but one that we could look at. Mr. Speaker, what we're finding is municipal councils and other interested personnel are bringing these proposals forward to the government to look at to see if we can find resources in order to do it. So, Mr. Speaker, if the member opposite could work with her community to find a solution, it was one that we would clearly look at favourably.
The Honourable the Member for Queens.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question through you is for the Premier. The survival of the Digby Ferry is an issue of high importance to the economy of southwest Nova Scotia, especially the fishery. This service allows fishermen to land their product one morning and have it at the fish market in Boston early the next day. The federal government and the provinces of Nova Scotia and New Brunswick have come forward with temporary funding, but there is still no long-term solution. Increased promotion, diverse and increased use could go a long way to help stabilize this asset. My question to the Premier is, why didn't your government use this ferry to transport the provincial tree bound for Boston?
The Honourable the Minister of Natural Resources.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, it was a great pleasure to be down in Annapolis County on Monday, joined by the member from Digby Annapolis and over 100 school children. It was a great day celebrating this tradition. The tree was cut, it was sent off to Halifax that day, and it was trucked by the very capable employees of the Department of Transportation and Infrastructure Renewal to Boston, and my understanding is it's arriving there today. And we're looking forward to another great celebration on December the 4th.
The Honourable the Member for Queens on her first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, this provincial tree was transported the long way, or should I say the wrong way, by truck, traveling through the province of Nova Scotia and New Brunswick. This year's beautiful tree was cut in Clementsville at 10:30 in the morning, just a 40-minute drive from the Digby terminal. There was ample time to make the 3:30 p.m. St. John ferry. My question to the Premier is, why didn't your government use this opportunity to advertise the convenience and the efficiency of using this ferry as a link to the Boston market?
The Honourable the Minister of Natural Resources.
Yes, and thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, I would just point out that the Christmas tree lighting ceremony is on December the 4th, and it would seem to me that if we can get it there by today, November the 20th, it would seem to be in lots of time. The good people at the Department of Transportation and Infrastructure Renewal clearly know what they're doing. They've done it this way for years. In fact, their tradition goes back to 1971. They're doing a great job. This is a happy story. There's no need to cast aspersions on this very noble tradition.
Hear, 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 hear. The honourable member for Queens on her final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, we're talking about the importance of stabilizing a tremendous link from Digby, Nova Scotia to St. John's. That Digby ferry is so important to rural Nova Scotia. When this government made its funding announcement in August, the acting Minister of Economic Development, the Minister of Environment, said, "We continue to provide a safe and reliable service and maintain important economic and tourism links within our region and within the country." My question, Mr. Speaker, is to the Premier, why didn't this government support this service, support the community of Digby, all of Southwest Nova, a vital part of rural Nova Scotia, by using this ferry service to transport our provincial Boston tree?
The Honourable the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, the honourable member raises a good question, and the government will follow up on that. But, Mr. Speaker, let's not forget that honourable member and her caucus colleagues voted against the money that we're putting into the tree lighting this year, Mr. Speaker. They voted against the money that we're putting into the Digby Ferry to keep it in operation, Mr. Speaker. But, Mr. Speaker, I can assure that member we will follow up on this important issue.
The Honourable the member for Dartmouth East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is for the Minister of Health. I will table a document obtained through the Freedom of Information showing that between July 2004 and September 2008, there were almost 16,000 mental health cases presented at 4 emergency departments in the Capital District Health Authority. When these people are triaged, however, they do not present with life-threatening injuries, so are not made a high priority. Mental illness presents with very real pain, just that this is not diagnosable through standard physical tests. My question to the Minister is, what steps has your department taken to put in place a system for mental health triage in emergency departments across the province?
The Honourable the Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. There are a couple of fronts that we're taking on this one. Excuse me. One of them, of course, is the mobile intervention team that can be called upon by anybody within those emergency rooms that can bring those professionals in. The second piece, of course, here on the peninsula at the Halifax Infirmary, of course, the new expansion will incorporate mental health services right there in the emergency room. So when people present themselves, that they'll have those individuals, those specialists, right there on site to help them out.
The Honourable the member for Dartmouth East on her first supplementary.
Well, Mr. Speaker, it's time for mental health consumers in this province to be treated with the respect that they deserve. Presenting at an emergency department in crisis requires the same level of treatment as physical crisis. Mental health cases should not be forced to wait for hours simply because their illness is not externally visible. My question to the Minister of Health: when will mental health consumers be triaged appropriately in emergency departments in this province of Nova Scotia?
The Honourable the Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And I can say that today there's a lot of work that has gone on in training on those ER docs that are in our emergency rooms to better identify mental illness. Mr. Speaker, this is a very difficult issue, one that not all professionals are capable of working with. So, Mr. Speaker, there's been a number of courses that have gone on in training. Mr. Speaker, we continue to work with the mobile intervention team in order to try to fill in some of those gaps. But, Mr. Speaker, I can say there's been some tremendous work done in this regard.
The Honourable the member for Dartmouth East on her final supplementary.
That's just not enough, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, mental health services in Nova Scotia are inadequate. Consumers have long waits for care and cannot access immediate emergency attention. In the span of 4 years, almost 16,000 people in CDHA alone presented in ERs with a mental health crisis. My question to the Minister: What are you doing to ensure that Nova Scotians with a mental health emergency have immediate access, that's immediate access to care?
The Honourable the Minister of Health.
Thank you again, Mr. Speaker. And to the member opposite, as I said in my previous answer, is to invest in that mobile intervention team to work with training not only our health professionals, but police and other professionals within the communities that will come in contact with people that require mental services, Mr. Speaker, that will receive those services as soon as humanly possible. Mr. Speaker, of course, the expansion at the Halifax Infirmary with the new emergency room will have services on site 24 hours a day.
The Honourable the member for Glace Bay.
Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Minister of Health, Mr. Speaker. Last week, we learned from the Minister of Health that his government received and spent close to $106 million in federal money, which was drawn down from the Wait Times Reduction Fund. Mr. Speaker, I know that there are Nova Scotians sitting at home today waiting for procedures. Mr. Speaker, they will find it hard to believe that this government and this minister have spent $106 million in the past 4 years and no significant change to speak of. Mr. Speaker, we have seen investments made in programs, yet with no overall plan, no change. This government, Mr. Speaker, has not only mismanaged data, which the minister admitted last week, they have failed to execute their own plan. So my question for the minister is, why did his government even bother to create a wait time strategy if you had no intention of ever using it?
The Honourable the Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And what we found over time is as we increase services, as we utilize that wait time fund, we had more people using those services. So what we've done is responded to the increasing need, not necessarily to making that better, where we thought we were going. So, Mr. Speaker, it shows that the strategy is working, but one that we have to increase our concentration on and add more dollars to, because today we're meeting a larger consumer base for these services, that we need to find a way to get that extra going, which require, of course, more dollars.
The Honourable the member for Glace Bay on his first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, the minister in the past has highlighted programs which he says are good programs, and they are. And they should have been funded through the minister's health budget. But these are federal monies, Mr. Speaker, which I don't need to remind this government they'll be harder to come by in the coming years, and provide provincial governments with golden opportunities to make long-term changes. Mr. Speaker, if you look at the so-called non-implemented plan of this government, you'll see words like capacity and access and management and communication. All of the things the Minister of Health stated last week were not happening. My question to the minister is, why did the minister then admit last week there's no operating room information system when the wait times plan clearly recommends that be done?
The Honourable the Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, as I wrote to the member opposite in my letter dated September 18th, it showed a number of programs that were reinstated, whether it be the liver transplant and renal dialysis services, whether it be invest in additional physician seats, whether it be expand access to continuing care, try to reduce pressures on acute care. So, Mr. Speaker, those dollars were used strategically in different places around our health system in order to incite changes. But what we're finding is that, of course, demand continues to rise.
The Honourable the member for Glace Bay on his final supplementary.
Well, Mr. Speaker, if you go to war with no plan, you lose. We've already lost in Nova Scotia. This government has spent $106 million, and people are still waiting 2 years to get a hip replacement. And the minister, Mr. Speaker, can talk about all the programs he wants, because he and his government know spreading money to the program, and that program will be politically popular, people are still waiting. Mr. Speaker, our health care budget continues to grow at an unsustainable rate with very little return The biggest wait time we have in Nova Scotia is waiting to get rid of that minister and waiting to get rid of that government, Mr. Speaker. And I can tell you that wait time is about to come to an end, Mr. Speaker.
Question.
My final question for the minister is, why did this minister not use the 106... Sit down, Minister, I'm not finished. Why did this
Order,
minister...
please. Order, please. I believe that I'm the Speaker in this House, and I believe that you owe an apology. The Honourable, the member for Glace Bay.
Mr. Speaker, accept my apology, please. My question to the minister is, why did he not use the $106 million to make overall system changes that would make the healthcare system in this province more efficient and finally sustainable?
The Honourable, the Minister of Health.
Mr. Speaker, if that member would stand respectively and ask a question, I might want to answer it.
The Honourable, the member for Hants East. Order, please. Order, please. Order, please. The Honourable, the member for Hants East has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question will be for the Minister of Finance through you. Mr. Speaker, Phil Barrett worked for more than 40 years at the Halifax-Dartmouth Bridge Commission. In 1991, the pension plan was changed to a defined contribution plan, and because of that change, Mr. Barrett's pension expectations dropped to 20% of his salary, a mere $14,000 per year. The Bridge Commission Board of Directors agreed that this was unfair and wanted to top up his pension, but the Minister of Finance stepped in and would not allow that to happen. So my question for the Minister, why won't the Minister allow the Bridge Commission to do the right thing and top up Mr. Barrett's pension?
The Honourable, the Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, we have need in this province to be fair to all people who are members or former members of our public service. In this particular case, a number of individuals, and I'm not going to talk about names of people, but a number of individuals elected to convert their defined benefit plan to a defined contribution plan. It was their choice to do so, and while it is unfortunate if that choice didn't work out well, unfortunately the taxpayers of the province should not be asked to compensate them for that choice.
The Honourable, the member for Hants East on his first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, the taxpayers won't be paying. This is a user pay by the tolls. The Board of Directors have booked it for this pension. The Minister won't allow it, but he had no trouble using taxpayers' dollars for Fred McGilvery, $800,000, or CEO of the Atlantic Corporation, Michelle Carinci, 10 years worth of pension for 5 years worth of work.
Order, please. The time allotted for oral question by members has elapsed. The Honourable, the Premier, on an introduction.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and if you might permit me again, thank you for allowing me to make an introduction. Mr. Speaker, as the Minister of Economic Development indicated today in his resolution, Mr. Speaker, about new job development in Nova Scotia, we have some very special guests with us here today with respect to professional quality assurance, Mr. Speaker, who is a technology company expanding here in Nova Scotia and creating up to 200 more jobs in a Dartmouth location, Mr. Speaker, and we're very pleased to be partnering with them and assisting them in that regard. Mr. Speaker, I would ask my members to draw their attention to your gallery, Mr. Speaker, and I would ask our visitors to please rise and be recognized by the House. First of all, Mr. Speaker, Keith McIntosh, President, QA. We also have, Mr. Speaker, Ken Kuhn, Delivery Manager, Halifax. Steve Christie, Vice President, Corporate Services. We have Eric Noby, Director of Investment Attraction, Financial Services and Near-Store Solutions for NSBI. And Marvin Robar, Director of Investment at Nova Scotia Economic Development, Mr. Speaker. And again, I would ask all members to give him a warm welcome.
The Honourable, the Deputy Government, the Deputy Government House Leader. The Honourable the Government House Leader.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, before we proceed with government business for today, I would just ask for the concurrence of the House to recess at from the hour of 2 p.m. to 4 p.m. And during that recess, during that period, that we would have the consideration of the emergency debate that you referred to earlier and allow for that discussion to happen in the fullness, because the hours for today would put us at a later time, and I would seek the House's approval to do that.
Is it agreed? Agreed. Then the debate shall take place between the hours of 2 and 4 today. The Honourable the Deputy Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would you please call private members' public bills for second reading?
Private members' public bills for second reading. The Honourable the Deputy Government House Leader. The Honourable the Deputy Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would you please call Bill number 227, the Provincial Horse Act?
Bill number 227. The Honourable the Member for Halifax Citadel, Sable Island.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it's my pleasure and privilege to rise here today and to speak to Bill 227, an act to declare the Sable Island horse to be the provincial horse of Nova Scotia. Mr. Speaker, this bill is not just about the wild horses of Sable Island. You know, people have said to me, Leonard, why are you so concerned about the horses on Sable Island? Why are you so concerned about Sable Island? There's so few voters there, for starters. Or people say, why are you so busy about protecting these horses that no one will ever see, or very few people will ever see? And I think those are good questions, Mr. Speaker. You know, these bills, these policies that we pass in this legislature have to be more than whether or not it protects our particular constituencies, or whether it supports our voters, or adds to the self-interest of the people who supported us. Legislation has to be more than about humans, although that's our main priority. It has to be about our natural habitat. It has to be about living species as well, and our duties to it. So this bill, Mr. Speaker, although it doesn't speak to a large constituency, it speaks to an important part of my constituency, but it speaks to something that I think is far more important and far more fundamental in the long term. Okay, this bill is about stewardship for our natural habitat and all living things. It's about protecting our coastlines. It's about the importance of scientific research and understanding climate change in our future. It's an important part of our natural heritage and world heritage, in fact. So this bill, Mr. Speaker, while it talks about the wild horses of Sable Island, really is more about acknowledging and protecting our natural legacy, our natural heritage, and what we pass on to future generations. I'd like to say a little bit here, Mr. Speaker, about Sable Island itself. Sable Island is a tiny little sandbar, 42 kilometers long, about 1.5 kilometers wide. It's far offshore, approximately 160 kilometers southeast of Canso, which is Nova Scotia's nearest landfall. The island, as you know, Mr. Speaker, has been the focus of human activities and imagination and speculation for over 500 years. People have heard about shipwrecks and wild horses and seabirds and seals. It has a certain mystique to it. And I would say, Mr. Speaker, it's an iconic part of Nova Scotia. And so I wanted to give the members in this House a little flavor of Sable Island, and maybe I'll say a little bit before I come to a more specific reference. In any case, only a handful of people, as I said earlier, live on Sable Island. And I want to say something about those people who live on Sable Island year-round. These are the scientific staff and researchers, naturalists who work with the Sable Island Station, or at the Sable Island Station, who live and work there and conduct their research year-round. The staff and the researchers at Sable Island, Mr. Speaker, collect weather data, atmospheric research. It provides an infrastructure for the offshore, for human activities in the area. They include maintenance of aids to navigation, scientific research on the flora and fauna, and the support services of the offshore energy industry. In other words, Mr. Speaker, the staff and researchers at the Sable Island Station are an important vanguard. They're an important sentries on the front lines of some of the things that we want to know more about our coastlines, about our flora and fauna, about changes in climate. And so it's important for us to maintain that weather station there. I want to in particular say something about Zoe Lucas. Zoe Lucas has been a naturalist on Sable Island, has lived there for, I believe, about 30 years, and has become a passionate defender of the island and its conservation and preservation. Zoe Lucas is one of the founders of the Green Horse Society, a society that exists largely to protect the natural habitat of Sable Island. And she has devoted her life, Mr. Speaker, to preserving the island itself and to educating people about Sable Island and its natural habitat. And so I want to use this occasion, Mr. Speaker, to commend Zoe Lucas on behalf of the legislature for the work she has done in protecting this important part of our natural heritage. I want to say something also about the Sable Island Preservation Trust and that group that has also essentially devoted itself to education. It's a large group of people. They've raised funds, Mr. Speaker. They've had public events. They've advertised. And mostly they've educated young students about the island itself and served as, as a public relations arm almost of it. So these two groups of people, the Sable Island Station staff and the researchers and the Sable Island Preservation Trust have been two of the institutions that have helped us understand that island better and to bring the flavor of the island to those of us who have not yet seen it and some of us who hope to see it. Mr. Speaker, that sounded like a pitch. It was. I want to say something, Mr. Speaker, about the annual meeting of the scientific researchers who work on Sable Island or who work away from Sable Island, but who have a particular interest in it. Every year, Mr. Speaker, this group meets to share knowledge, to experience from the previous year, to set priorities for the year coming. And last year, I happened to be at their meeting, and it was delightful, Mr. Speaker, to see the enthusiasm of the research staff there for Sable Island and the discoveries that they make. Every year seems to bring us some new information about this wonderful island. Last year, for example, they talked about the beaching of thousands of huge surf clams. And of course, it led to a lot of speculation about where they come from and why it happened. And new atmospheric pollutants that they were sampling, and new atmospheric pollutants that they were finding. And they discovered a mysterious stand of snapdragons, Mr. Speaker. And Sable Island, as I'm going to talk about later, has also, in the past year, been the focus of new artistic and scientific and cultural events. But this group, Mr. Speaker, will be meeting again in March to review their research and their findings and to talk about their future work. And I'm very much looking forward to it. And I want to thank Zoe Lucas and David Richardson and Mark Butler and all of those others who bring this gathering together and who make it happen for us. Okay. Mr. Speaker, over 330 species of birds have been sighted on Sable Island. The island is a home to a number of breeding bird species. It offers a habitat for migrating shorebirds and waterfowl. The Ipswich sparrow, a large subspecies of the savanna sparrow, nests exclusively on the island, Mr. Speaker, and nesting colonies of Arctic and common terns, all threatened species, and declining, all threatened species are present on those islands. So, Mr. Speaker, apart from the horses, there are these living things that are not extinct but threatened, but are present on Sable Island, and we have an obligation to conserve and preserve them. I want to say something, Mr. Speaker, about our own obligations to understanding that island and the living things and the species that live there. As you know, Mr. Speaker, most of the research that's conducted on Sable Island and off Sable Island is supported by Environment Canada and Fisheries Oceans. And I want to commend Fisheries and Oceans, the Department of Fisheries Oceans, for making a commitment to maintaining the Sable Island station and its research. This funding has been provided by the Oceans Action Plan, which has now evolved into the Health of the Oceans program. So funding of this station, Mr. Speaker, is to maintain operations and programs. As I said earlier, operations and programs that are vital to our scientific understanding of Sable Island, for developing a national wildlife area designation for the island. But I want to thank the Department of Fisheries and Oceans and the Health of the Oceans program for supporting research there. The department, Mr. Speaker, has guaranteed funding for 5 years, and this funding has to be approved every year. And funding is available up to March 2002 and includes a maintenance budget for Sable Island and a budget for the Canadian Wildlife Service. But, Mr. Speaker, having funding approved from year to year, or having a 5-year funding even, really doesn't provide a stable basis for a research station that conducts such important work. And we need to do more, Mr. Speaker, to work towards getting long-term funding for the research station. And I certainly would encourage the Department of Fisheries and Oceans to continue its support. But beyond that, Mr. Speaker, I'd like the province itself and our government to take more ownership of that island, and particularly its research on the island and the conservation of species on that island. And so we would very much like to see this stewardship that's implied in this bill here carried over to hardcore support and long-term funding. And certainly I would invite the Minister of Environment and Labour. I know we were talking last night about this bill and Sable Island, and he said he would be very interested in going there and getting an assessment of the issue and what the Department of Environment can do. And I was delighted that he offered me an opportunity to go with him to this really important part of my constituency. And I thank him for considering that, and I look very much forward to the Department of Environment and the Minister of Environment going to Sable Island and conducting an assessment and perhaps even offering long-term support for research on the island, as his federal counterpart in Ottawa at the Department of Environment and Fisheries and Oceans has done. But it's very important, Mr. Speaker, that we know more about Sable Island and its natural habitat and this natural heritage. Of course, Mr. Speaker, Sable Island is important and its natural heritage is important. But today we're here to talk about really probably the most iconic, probably the best known aspect of Sable Island. and that's its famous fauna, particularly its wild horses. So although access to the island is restricted, Mr. Speaker, both because of the location of Sable Island, 160 kilometers offshore, as I was saying, and by the regulations, the horses themselves are well known, and they're of great interest to the scientific community. They're important to us for cultural reasons, for heritage reasons. There is a certain romanticism, Mr. Speaker, about the wild horses of Sable Island, and that they are descended from shipwrecks, survivors. And I did a little bit of research on the history of Sable Island, and I came across a very interesting excerpt from a book by an author whose name now escapes me for the moment, but it's Christie, The Horses of Sable Island by Pottersfield Press. And this is what she said on page 70. It says, they are said to have been taken to their sandy home by Norsemen, Mr. Speaker, or Cabot. By Norsemen. Norsemen on horsemen who were Norsemen, perhaps. By Baron Leclerc in 1518. By Portuguese fishermen in 1582. And by Marquis de la Roche Mesgois in 1598. And by Acadian horse ranchers in the early 1700s. And I was intrigued, Mr. Speaker, by the Acadian link. There seem to be two strands to the story about the Acadians. Some people believe that it was Acadian ranchers who established themselves in the island in the early 1700s, and that those horses are direct descendants from them. But there are others who say that during the Grand Dérangement, during the expulsion, after the Acadians were dispossessed, people stole their horses and moved the horses to Sable Island to hide them. And that these horses, yes, they are from the Acadians, but they are refugees and plunder from those days. Many believe that these horses have escaped from a Spanish wreck, and that those.
Would the honourable member yield the floor for an introduction, please?
Yes, certainly, Mr. Speaker.
You. Chair recognizes the honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we have some distinguished guests in your gallery today, and I'd like to introduce them to the House of Assembly. Today visiting with us is Minister Leslie Ramsamy, the Minister of Health from Guyana. He's also President of the 61st World Health Assembly. Also visiting with Minister Ramsamy is Dr. Sonia Churchill from Dalhousie and Nancy Beck from Connections Clubhouse. Also, I think I see Dr. Jim Miller there as well as my deputy, Cheryl Dwar. I'd like them to stand and receive the warm welcome of the Nova Scotia Assembly.
The honourable member for Halifax Citadel at Sable Island.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. While we're doing acknowledgements and introductions, I'd like to acknowledge the presence in the gallery of Peggy Cameron, who is one of the co-chairs of Friends of the Halifax Common. And I'd like to thank Peggy for the tremendous job she's doing in educating me about the Halifax Common and its importance, and educating the people of Halifax. So I'd like her to rise and receive the applause of the members in the House. In any case, Mr. Speaker, I was talking about some of the myths and perhaps some of the realities about the horses of Sable Island and how they arrived there. And some people believe, as I was saying, that they were survivors, that they are survivors from a Spanish wreck, and that they have their roots in a ship that they were being transshipped and ended up on Sable Island. And those who have studied the genetic origins of these horses say that, yes, indeed, they are Spanish horses, and many of them are Spanish horses. And over time, they appear to have adapted. And one of the reasons why they look so small, and some people have mistaken them for ponies, is because of their natural habitat. But it's that adaptation, Mr. Speaker, it's their origins, perhaps even their mixed origins, that make them unique and make them such an important part of our natural heritage. In any event, Mr. Speaker, regardless of the origins of these sable horses and their romance and mysticism that goes around them, we know that the sable horses are among the few wild horse populations left in this world. That the Sable Island horses are entirely unmanaged. They're not subject to any kind of interference. And since 1961, Mr. Speaker, the Sable Island horses have had legal protection under the Sable Island regulations of the Canada Shipping Act of all measures. We know that the number of horses on Sable Island generally range between 200 and 350, and there have been a number of calls over the years, Mr. Speaker, to control or to cull or remove these horses. Indeed, the protections that we have now, as I was saying, protections that were established in 1961 under the Sable Island regulations of the Canada Shipping Act, those public Sable Island regulations really emerged out of a debate that began in the 1960s. In 1960, when the federal government announced that the horses were to be taken from the island. And Mr. Speaker, in 1960, there was an outcry. And as I understand it, it was an outcry that was led largely by school children. These were school children who disagreed with the policy or the proposed policy. And they wrote hundreds of letters to the then Prime Minister, Mr. Diefenbaker. And out of that outcry among the children, and Mr. Diefenbaker, to his credit, responded to that and established the regulations that I referred to earlier. I want to say something, Mr. Speaker, about a book that arrived on my desk last year. A book entitled Free as the Wind, The Wild Horses of Sable Island. And Free as the Wind talks about that public campaign by school children across Canada to save the wild horses of Sable Island. And I want to give credit to Jamie Bastido, the author of that book, and Susan Took, for bringing that story to life and popularizing it. And it's won a remarkable number of awards, Mr. Speaker, both for the story and for the illustration. And this is what the cover to that, the desk jacket to that book says, Mr. Speaker. The horses of Sable Island, they're a romantic and enduring symbol of the will to survive in an unforgiving environment. Free as the Wind, as one reviewer said, Jamie Bastido's recreation of one of the most fascinating episodes in this history of these wild creatures, the moment in the early 60s when it was decided the horses would be removed from the island and auctioned off, many of them slaughtered for dog food. School children across the country wrote Canada's then Prime Minister John Diefenbaker, pleading with him to restore the horses to the island to save them from certain death. The horses are a national treasure, not only because their history dates back as early as the settlement of Canada, but also because their continued survival showed the world that children can make a difference. Susan Took's sparkling paintings capture the spare but magnificent terrain of Sable Island in a way that will captivate readers for ages. This is an enduring account, is how one reader in Yellowknife, Mr. Speaker, said. This is an enduring account of how one young person can make a difference and how standing up for what you believe is right will have an impact. In addition to the inspiring story, the illustrations provide vivid scenes depicting the freedom and beauty of the wild horses of Sable Island. And for those of you who haven't brought all of your seasonal gifts this year, I certainly encourage you to have a look at this book, because it's not only a great story, but in this year of Democracy 250, it tells us that young people can make a difference, and one person can make a big difference, Mr. Speaker. I also wanted to say something about another great work that has been produced in the last year, Mr. Speaker. Over the past several years, an American, and sometimes it does take people from away to recognize the real value of what we have, Mr. Speaker. An American from New York, Robert Dutesco, has an obsession with the sable horses. Mr. Dutesco has been there several times. He's photographed them. And as he said, his obsession and his experience of traveling on Sable Island left him with a passion for one world, the place where we live, the place we share. And I'm quoting here, Mr. Speaker. For Roberto Dutesco, home has a plural sense. He explains that home is a place where even after you have left, you still exist. It's a place where you look forward to return. It's a place that helps you become. So, Mr. Speaker, despite this renowned photographer who's photographed some of the most beautiful places and some of the most beautiful women in the world for fashion magazines, for him, the wild horses of Sable Island has become his obsession, and Sable Island has become his home. And, Mr. Speaker, his obsession so impressed the folks at Arcadia Productions that they did a feature film on Robert Dutesco and his obsession with the sable horses. And if I may be allowed a prop, Mr. Speaker, or at least a promotion, each of the members in this House will find on their desk Arcadia Entertainment's production of Chasing Wild Horses. And Chasing Wild Horses documents Mr. Dutesco's fascination with the sable horses. Chasing Wild Horses, Mr. Speaker, last month won the Best Director award for its director and for Arcadia Entertainment at the New York Film Festival. And I'd like to read a little bit more about what the promoters have said about Chasing Wild Horses. I must say, I saw it at the Atlantic Film Festival, Mr. Speaker, and I thought more people should see this. Everyone should see this because it's a part of the world that hardly anyone will see. And this brings that world to light. It brings the horses to light. And you can understand why this mystique and this myth around the horses has emerged and why so many people are obsessed with it. And here's what they say, Mr. Speaker. The story of Sable Island's beautiful wild horses and Roberto Dutesco, a well-known New York fashion photographer whose obsession is with the secrets of the herd of wild horses on a remote island in the North Atlantic. Dutesco has photographed some of the most beautiful women in the world as New York's most well-known fashion photographer, and his idea of perfect beauty is hidden on a tiny, storm-tossed island in the darkest part of the North Atlantic. Dangerous, alone, wild, and free, existing only by the grace of a delicate balance of two epic ocean currents, a barometer of the ocean climate. Roberto has searched the world for a fleeting image of his childhood, wild horses running on the sand. And when he finally found them on Sable Island, he discovered his ultimate subject, but he also finds the horses in deep trouble. Sable Island, Mr. Speaker, Chasing Wild Horses, Mr. Speaker, provides some of the freest, documents some of the freest and wildest creatures on Earth. And his exploration of Sable Island reveals where the mysterious Sable Island horses come from, to learn about his quest to remind us that some of the most beautiful places in the world are best when they're left untouched. And so I bring these two great works to your attention, Mr. Speaker, and to your attention because for those of us who have not been there and who never will be there, it gives us a little flavor of Sable Island and the wild horses and why it's so important that we take steps to protect this important piece of my constituency and of the universe. So in summary, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to say that this bill, Bill 227, an act to declare the Sable Island horse to be the provincial horse of Nova Scotia, is more than just about the wild horses, and it's more than just about Sable Island. It's about stewardship for our natural habitat and all living things. It's about protecting our coastlines. It's about the importance of conducting and supporting scientific research and understanding climate change on the frontiers. It's an important part of our natural and world heritage. And it's about acknowledging and protecting our natural legacy and heritage, Mr. Speaker, and what we're going to pass on to future generations. Thank you.
Thank you. The chair recognizes the honourable member for Digby Annapolis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm pleased to stand in my place and speak on Bill 227. Just a few words.
Oh, no. Come on. Give us a good speech.
I won't be long. I won't be long. But I commend the member from Citadel Sable Island for tabling this bill. You know, it has brought the attention to Sable Island. Mr. Speaker, I read a book on Sable Island not too long ago, a year ago, I guess, whatever. And it was from 1801 to 1804, this book was. It's when the Canadian government first put people out there to try to fend off ships. There was a lot of ships going ashore on that island, so they put people there to try. They put guns on each end of the island, big flags, so they could wave to the ship somehow or make a big noise to keep them away from the island. This is the way. Well, worked a little. There was a few shipwrecks still in that 3-year period. But the people that went there, the people that they put there, a man and his wife, I don't remember their names, and the children, and they had a few workers there too. So anyway, the ponies were there, and it's surprising that the same amount of ponies are there now that there was then. You know, it's pretty sustainable, stayed pretty steady. But also on that island was seals. There were seals on that island, and through that book, I kind of counted them up. Like he said, he would go. It was a journal he was keeping. Just like I've kept one of them all my life as a fisherman, and he was the same thing. He was a sea captain, so he would go to this point one morning, and they would be 5 or 6 or 7 seals there. And by the way, they ate the seals too. That was through the winter, especially when their food supplies got low. They ate. They harvested a seal and fed it to the people on the island. Good food, best. You wouldn't get any better. They never ate the horses, though. They never touched the horses.
I just wanted to clarify.
But they ate the seals because it was good food, good protein, and that's how they survived. But anyway, getting back to the count of them, he would go to this point one day, and there'd be 8, 10 seals there, he'd say, and another point another day or another cove. 15, 20, highest. He spoke through the whole book about 60 or 70 at the most in one place. So I figured it all up through the book, and I figured on that whole island, there was probably 30 to 50 ponies and probably 1,500 to 2,000 seals, gray seals. That's what was on that island. Well, today there's still that 30, 40, 50 ponies, but there's 200,000 gray seals there. Whatever. So that's enough to be on Sable Island. 1,000-pound animals, that's enough. No, I'm concerned. I have a concern. I have a concern. The member from Halifax, Citadel, Sable Island is concerned about these ponies, and he talked about stewardship. My concern is, as the fish is disappearing around that island, what's these seals going to eat? Now, I'm not going to say they're going to take a pony down and eat it, but I'll guarantee you when the kelp and the seaweed's gone, the fish is gone around that island, they'll start eating the grass and the sand dunes, and they probably are now. So I would say the member, he wants to save the ponies, he better look at the problem that may be there for them ponies. That's what I believe. And I commend him. I commend the member. I commend the member for caring about them ponies, because I think it is a great thing. But if this keeps going on in the environment out there, what has changed, going from 1,500 animals, 1,000-pound animals around that island to 200 or maybe 250,000 animals, there's something out of whack out there, and it could bring danger to these ponies. So I just wanted to point that out, Mr. Speaker, and with that, I'll take my seat. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll recognize the honourable member from Hants East. Pardon me? Minister, okay. The chair will recognize the Honourable Minister of Tourism, Culture and Heritage.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and to the members of the House, and for our viewing public. I listened today with great interest because yesterday in the House question period, I had said that I was the son of a lighthouse keeper, and indeed that's a fact. But not only the son of a lighthouse keeper, but our whole family has been entrenched in the lighthouse keeping business, or in the business of life-saving on the marine coast of Atlantic Canada. I want to talk a little bit about Sable Island because listening to the members across the way, they read from reports, they spoke of books, and they told stories. But Mr. Speaker, in fact, I actually had the opportunity to be on Sable Island. Also, I grew up listening to stories, some factual, ghost stories, true stories, whatever, because my people actually kept light on Sable Island. The last superintendent of Sable Island was my Uncle Arthur, who I believed had a 5-year stay there, and at that time he had his family with him, his wife Audrey, Harlan, Janet, Sylvia, Valerie, and I hope I didn't forget them because they are my cousins and aunts and uncles. But the point is, in 1960 they returned from the function of actually being superintendent of that light. What did that mean? The superintendent of the Sable Light kept order, kept track of the supplies, made sure that the men of that time manned the stations. There were a number of lights on different islands, on the island, different ends of the island. And I think there was over a number of 100 and almost 200 people at one time there on the island. Now these people mostly from the, all parts of Nova Scotia, but a lot of them, Mr. Speaker, actually were from Eastern Passage. A lot of them were from the Eastern Shore. Some of the family names, I had another cousin, Billy Maskell, Herson Maskell, Keith Maskell, the Williamses from Ostia Lake, the Days from Oyster Pond, the Bowsers were out there. All of these Eastern Shore names were on the light. At that time, young men would go out for a certain amount of time. I'm not sure, I'm forgetting the facts, but up to 4 to 6 months, and then they would go home by ship at that time. I couldn't even remember the names of some of the vessels that transported them back and forth, and another shift would come out. But what was constant was my uncle and aunt, who raised their family for 5 years because he was a superintendent. They actually lived on the island. So you can imagine what would take place. What would take place in a 5-year stay? Yes, they witnessed storms, Mr. Speaker. They witnessed a lifestyle associated with the Sable Island pony, as it was called at that time. And today we're calling it a horse because indeed, in fact, I believe it is. But anyway, so many stories were shared that that I'm going to recall just a couple of them, and in regards to the Sable Island pony. First of all, when you had a lot of people there working, there would be a lot of spare time, I suggest. And what would happen, they had big barns there, and they would keep a number of horses in the barns, and there would be a number of horses that wouldn't be stable. And the young men at that time would saddle these horses, and they would have races in their free time. And they would clock each other, and there had been some, I won't say who was the fastest, because on the Eastern Shore it's still in question, and some Saturday evenings there's still a question who was the fastest. But anyway, we won't get into that. But so they became a social and a recreational use. But also they became used as a working force. Now, the purpose of the people, as the member across the way said, was that they were on that island in a life-saving capacity. So that meant that they had to be there to protect the people who would be, attempted to sail close on the shoals. I got a note passed to me, Mr. Speaker. I just lost my thought for a minute. So anyway, 200 or 300 men would be there, so you know that they would have to have supplies for 200 or 300 men on that island. And they used the horses to gather the supplies up off of the beaches as was landed by the ships. And these horses would haul oil and flour and potatoes and soap and all the supplies of a couple hundred people twice a year from the shoreline up into the storehouses. And so they were used as a commercial use as well. These horses were looked after well. They were fed and they were maintained. So at this particular time, I am stopping for the introduction, and as I'm getting some support, this is so very important for me just to pause and, Mr. Speaker, recognize the introduction. Thank you.
Thank you. The Chair will recognize the Honourable Minister of Education on an introduction.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to my colleague for interrupting his entertaining story. But I do want to take the opportunity to make an introduction, if I could. And I'm pleased to welcome to our assembly here today a number of employees from my department, the Department of Education, who are on tour of the building, and who, for some of them, it's their first visit to the legislature. And so I'd like to welcome them, and I'm glad you're here for a very entertaining part of our program. So a warm welcome to the staff from Department of Education.
Thank you. The Honourable Minister of Tourism, Culture and Heritage.
And I welcome you folks as well. Thank you. Mr. Speaker, to get back to my life, acquaintance with that beautiful sandbar in the Atlantic Ocean, the one that I care so dearly about, the one that I grew up hearing about stories, part of my whole development process. Mr. Speaker, I want to tell you, speaking about the pony, and I'll say the pony in respect of the traditional name, but understanding that it's the act is about the horse. But in getting back to that, so they were used for many purposes. And yes, it's true. How did they get there? Well, there's many explanations about that. But indeed, the fact is that they are there. They're there now. They're there. They're recognized worldwide. And, we have government involvement to protect them. We know that they were used for social and also commercial uses. But getting back to the end of my uncle and aunt's stay with their family on Sable Island, when they left, my uncle, because of the request of the children and not wanting to change their lifestyle too much, decided that he was going to bring home to the hit of Jador Sable Island ponies. Now, can you imagine? So anyway, he wrote at that time, the federal government, must have been the Conservative government in power at that time, I don't know, I hope it was. But anyway, he did get permission from the level of federal government to bring 2 Sable Island ponies home with him to Jador. And that was many years ago, and I can even remember the names, Princess and Dolly. Well, the excitement about Princess and Dolly, when they arrived home, my uncle didn't have her in the barn all the time because in just I believe 9 or 10 months later, Flash appeared. So then we ended up with 3. So 2 mares, with Flash being a horse. So at that particular time, we had 3 Sable Island ponies in the Hit of Jador. Well, that created great excitement. Everyone would come down to the Hit of Jador, almost a tourist attraction of type, and they would come to his barn, which is next door to our property. And we were horse people anyway, Mr. Speaker. We always had horses on our property and continued to have horses on our properties until just recently. But anyway, Flash was a young horse who had a very, I guess, aggressive type of spirit. But Princess and Dolly, indeed, Dolly was the kindest, but Princess was aggressive as well, as the nature of them can be. If you know the nature of the Sable Island pony, maybe they're not as docile as what we may think, because they can be aggressive in their own right. But anyway, Mr. Speaker, so can you imagine as a young man growing up in the community to live next door, and especially to your uncle? So I had many opportunities to ride them. We had a buggy, we had harness and all of the good things. So later on, as everyone grew up, my uncle then gave and sold the Sable Island ponies away. But that is a memory that I cherish. It's a story I tell often. And I'll tell you, I've always kept Sable Island as a special place, near and dear to me. So when I was a young man, I had the opportunity to work on the oil rigs as well. And of course, I would just set off of Sable Island. I would just set off Sable Island on the oil rig, and when the sun would set in the night, I can remember that fantastic and wonderful view of the sun setting in Sable Island. But one thing I used to notice, Sable Island, if you haven't been there, it's a wonderful sandbar. It's spacious sand escapes, and also the wind blows and moves the dunes around from here to there. There are no trees on the island. But there's long, flat spaces in which the waves pass over. The horses in the morning would go from one end of the island and wait until the tide went down, and they would cross this gully and go over to feed where the grass was a little better. And then, I would watch them, and then when the tide started to rise, I would say, how are they going to get across? So just before the tide would reach a certain point, I was on the oil rig watching the horses, and across they would line up. They would line up knowing that the tide was going to rise and that they would not have free passage across that channel, and they had the intellect and the intelligence to go across that channel before the tide would rise. And then in the early morning light again, Mr. Speaker, they would line up and wait for the tide to lower. So we're talking about an animal that was very intelligent. Mr. Speaker, I love horses. I said I grew up around horses, and I understand the significance of the horse to our development, to our country, as they get little acclaim for that. We don't talk about that too much, but across the way, one of the members would understand the importance to our rural life of the horse, the team, when we used to hitch them up in our harness, and also our parents sending us to the barn early in the morning to look after the horse before we had our own breakfast, before the wood fire would be made on in our kitchens. The horses played a tremendous part in our history, a tremendous part in the development of our province, of our country, and also they played an important part in the life-saving ability of men and women who lived on Sable Island, and now bring us national acclaim to our country. National acclaim because of movies and or books or stories told about the Sable Island pony. Mr. Speaker, I'm very pleased to hear that, or to see that this legislation is being put forth by the member, and we're going to support it. And it's important to make sure that the recognition that's appropriate to the horses of Sable Island, the horses now to Sable Island, remains forever. Mr. Speaker, one other thing I could do, but due to the respect of time, I could tell you stories. I could tell you ghost stories about Sable Island. I could tell you, as I said earlier on, maybe stories that haven't been embellished as much. I'm a bit of a storyteller myself. Well, Mr. Speaker, I would make it interesting. You could believe me if I had the opportunity of that. The boys from time to time on Sable Island used to make a little moonshine. I don't know if that's right to say that. I'm not mentioning any names, but not legally, of course, but at that particular time and period, that happened as well. And I'm not mentioning, Mr. Speaker, any names. So anyway, Mr. Speaker, there's so many interesting stories to talk about Sable Island. So before I take my seat, I have something here. I have a flag. I have a flag that actually flew, a Nova Scotia flag that actually flew on the island of Sable Island. And I would like to, I'm afraid don't think it's appropriate to show it, and I don't want to table it because it may be perceived as a prop, but in my place, Mr. Speaker, I have a flag that actually flew on Sable Island in December 2006 for a full month. And I think in the spirit of the legislation, I think that in the respect of what we're doing here today, later on, Mr. Speaker, I'll present this flag that's very dear and true to me, to the member across the way from Halifax Citadel, in the respect of the legislation that's been put forth here today. So the Sable Island horse forever. The Sable Island horse forever. We appreciate the Sable Island horse and all the good folks that have worked on Sable Island to provide safety to the marine industry, the schooners, square riggers, even today, those people play an important part with reporting on our environment, our weather. And I don't know if I shared with you, but when I actually went to Sable Island just a little over a year ago, they heard that the minister was coming on Sable Island, and the folks on Sable Island met me on the helicopter pad. They had researched about my family and the contribution that we made in regards to Sable Island, and I was very honored to be presented a flag, a bottle of sand, some other artifacts, but especially, Mr. Speaker, an article that was in the Halifax Herald of 1956 or 1958, talking and speaking about the Duke's family who was living on Sable Island with their family, and how they were adapting to a hostile environment, how they were working with the other men that were there, and it became a part of their lifestyle. A part of their lifestyle that if you were speaking to them today, they would surely share with you some of the stories, Mr. Speaker. But anyway, so shortly after I take my seat, I will be presenting this flag to the member from Halifax Citadel, and I hope he keeps this flag. I hope he respects the flag. It's our provincial flag, of course, and a movement by our government to fly the provincial flag on Sable Island. I can speak his name. I believe it was Mr. Bill Langell at that time. He was the gentleman who decided that the provincial flag should be flown on Sable Island so that we could stake our claim that we knew that that island had a provincial representative, that it wasn't only federal territory, but indeed it was a part of the Nova Scotia history that has made us so famous, not only in Canada, but across the world. Mr. Speaker, thank you for sharing some time with you all. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much. And I'm going over there.
Thank you. Chair recognizes the honourable member for Hants East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My comments will, I expect, be somewhat briefer than the minister. But I want to say that I actually enjoyed the comments of the minister. I thought that was good information for members to have. I've never been to Sable Island, and so to hear his account of his family's history there, I appreciate that very much. Well, this bill, an act to declare the Sable Island horse to be the provincial horse of Nova Scotia, I'm glad to have an opportunity to stand and support this piece of legislation. I think the wonderful thing about the Sable Island horse, Mr. Speaker, is the mystery, I think, around that animal. I think all Nova Scotians pretty well agree that sable horse was not indigenous to Sable Island, and that somebody had to put it there. And I think all of the variety of stories as to how it got there only lends, I think, to the interest and to create interest in this horse. I think it's pretty much agreed that the horses were at one point, or are descendants of domesticated horses that were on the mainland of New France, or certainly Nova Scotia. And I know one account, at least part of an account that I read, I can't remember the name of the gentleman, but I know it's recorded, who actually collected horses that were left on farms when the Acadians were deported. And I think that his idea was actually to use the island as a holding area for horses that he intended to ship to Boston or wherever that he had a market for those horses. And and I think probably some of those horses were removed, that he actually was able to move some of them, and then for whatever reasons they all didn't get removed from the island. And I think they're probably I'm not sure. Even though this will go in Hansard, even I will recognize I may not have all of the facts correct, but I would assume that probably there was other livestock as well, perhaps some cattle and so on, went on that island, on the notion that they would be shipped as well. It's an interesting question around the genetics of the Sable Island horse. Certainly, when you look at them, they do have characteristics of some horse breeds that we could recognize. The abundance of heavy mane and forelock and tail, certainly things that we see in Arabian horses and horses of actually quite good breeding, Mr. Speaker. Members may or may not know that I keep some Canadian horses. And I think about 2003, and I may be wrong on the date, but recently, in the last few years, the Canadian became Canada's national breed of horse, along with the Chanticleer chicken is our national chicken breed, and the Canadian cow is our national breed of cattle. And members may not know that when you think of all of the breeds of chickens and cattle, we are not known for creating a lot of livestock, generating a lot of new breeds in this country. The Canadian cow and the Hayes converter are the only two breeds of cattle that were generated in Canada, Mr. Speaker. And although presently I think there are four breeds of sheep, the Outaouais and the Rideau Arcots, as well as the Canadian Arcot, are three of those breeds. And I think the DLS is what it's referred to from Quebec, is a Dorset-Leicester-Suffolk cross that has been produced as a breed, recognized as a breed now by Canadian livestock records in Quebec. The reason I mention the Canadian is a product of horses that were sent to New France by Louis XIV between 1640 and 1700. And there are those who would make a pretty good argument that the Morgan horse in Vermont, Mr. Speaker, is actually a Canadian horse, and where Vermont and Quebec obviously next to one another, border one another, and this little horse appears in Vermont, which several hundred of them already in Quebec at the same time. I'm sure the Americans would not, jump on that argument to say that, but there is a fair bit of evidence to that effect. I believe at one point, and I wish I had the year right, but I think a Canadian stallion was placed on Sable Island. So it's I think quite possible that some of those bloodlines would appear in Sable Island ponies in the present day. There is Sable Island ponies at the Shumanakadee Wildlife Park, and our clerk has said Upper Clements Park. So for anybody who doesn't easily get to Sable Island, there is an opportunity to have a look at these horses. I've never seen the ones at Upper Clements Park, but the ones at Shumanakadee I really thought were quite nice animals, you know, and I can appreciate good horse flesh, but they were fairly well put together and not quite so small as I was thinking that they might be on that island. It is a fairly inhospitable environment, I think we could all say, in the North Atlantic, and that habitat certainly has worked to select the hardiest animals out of the herd and to ensure a fairly rugged gene pool of animals, Mr. Speaker. And I think that considering the history of that population of horses, that so connected to the history of Nova Scotia, and the events that we regard as important in Nova Scotia, that Nova Scotians would be well served, I think, to recognize this horse as the provincial horse. And I think we should consider ourselves lucky that all those horses weren't removed from Sable Island, and that for generations to come, they can enjoy that part of our heritage. So with those comments, I'll listen to other members, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. The honourable member for Kings West.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and pleased today to join the debate on this bill that will make the Sable Pony the provincial horse. And I know, coming from Newfoundland, you know, and the significance of the Newfoundland pony, I can draw a parallel here in Nova Scotia. That probably there is nothing that captures the imagination of Nova Scotians like the story of the Sable ponies, Sable horses, and how they survived the shipwrecks, and many times humans did not survive. And as the honourable member pointed out, it has led to the selection now of a breed of horses that are of the I guess the highest genetic pool that we could probably find, perhaps in North America. So it is a great story that does appeal to all of us, and one that obviously we want to preserve and have as part of our heritage. The same as I mentioned in regards to the well-known, well-liked, and now many people, actually I know some here in Nova Scotia, that have purchased a Newfoundland pony because, again, it's a special breed, and it has a special history with it. As a former geography teacher, it's probably more of the island itself of Sable Island that I also find very captivating. When you take a look at the very first photographs that were taken of Sable Island, and today, of course, we're able to get a lot of satellite photos and imagery updated annually. But when you take a look at the first mappings and the first photographs, and you take a look at how the islands change over 20, 50, 75 years, their actual size, their shape, and their location as the sand is moved around and new dunes are formed. So it is an island that has given us, I guess, a great deal of information about the Gulf current, a great deal of information about weather and climate, and that currently a scientific team that inhabits the island and keeps those records ongoing. I guess for many people in the in the science world and the natural history world when there was talk about the federal government not funding the work on Sable Island. There was a tremendous outcry. And so even though there's only been a few people that have actually visited Sable Island, it is part of the consciousness, however, of many people, and it is the sable horse, the sable pony, that I think brings us around to that. So if this bill in any way brings a greater recognition, a greater sense that we need to do all that is necessary to preserve the place of the sable horse in our natural history and again our connections to our human history of the province, then I think this will be a bill that can have some real tangible value. And because it's getting us talking and thinking about the future of this of the horse, and that we may need to have some interventions. If my honourable colleague talks about how the seal is impacting on the island, and we start to lose some of the natural vegetation out there, it will indeed be a cause for concern. So I want to thank the member from Halifax Citadel, Sable Island, for bringing forth this bill. It's a good initiative, and indeed one that we hope will have a speedy passage through the House. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. The Chair recognizes the Honourable Minister of Agriculture.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I am pleased to rise and speak on the bill before the House this afternoon, a bill that will make the Sable Island horse the provincial horse. Mr. Speaker, I understand we're not permitted to use props, but I do want to thank the individual or individuals responsible for circulating the DVD to honourable members. The title of the DVD, Chasing Wild Horses, is interesting, and I flipped over to the back cover, the narrative, so to speak, and it indicates that the photographer is well-renowned, one of the most renowned New York photographers that in fact exists. And he's photographed the most beautiful women in the world, and but his idea of and I'm just reading from the back cover if I might, but his idea of perfect beauty is hidden on the tiny storm-tossed island, which of course is Sable Island in the North Atlantic. And I think that is a remarkable statement to make, because those little horses, those creatures are in fact some of the most wild and free animals that actually exist in all of the world. And you know, I know that the NDP has, I trust, spoken with the Nova Scotia Federation of Agriculture, Mr. Speaker, because you know we do have many breeds of horses in the province. Now, some aren't perhaps as renowned as the Sable Island pony, but we do have Arabian, and as the minister mentioned, we have, or pardon me, as the member for Hants East mentioned, we have the Canadian horse, which he owns some of them. There's Morgan, there's Percherons, there's Clydes, there's Belgium, there's any number of different breeds of horses. So I trust that the member that presented the bill through his caucus did some good research on coming forward with this bill, and perhaps he can speak to that when he closes debate. And certainly I will be supporting the legislation, but you know, with the ground being white and things of that nature, it's hard not to think that you know, well, I hear one of my honourable colleagues talking about Santa Claus, but I was thinking of dashing through the snow in a one-horse open sleigh, and you know, so it may be timely, but I do think that that there is a lot of mystery, there's a lot of romance about these little survivors, there's a lot of intrigue, but that would be, I guess, the extent, Mr. Speaker, of my comments, and I just wanted to bring some considerations forward as to how widely the NDP, and in particular the member, has done his canvassing and research regarding this particular bill. And I'll just close off by saying that I have heard, and I've never been to Sable Island, but I hear that the research station on Sable Island has a fence all the way around it because those creatures love to scratch themselves up against the research station. So in order to stop the horses from doing damage to themselves or, in fact, to the building, they had to put a fence around the research station. And I know the Honourable the Minister of Tourism and Culture spoke about his kinfolk and the lighthouse that is on Sable Island, or at least was on Sable Island, that as the sand moves in, the folks were, and he may have spoke to this, and I apologize, Mr. Speaker, I might have missed it, but because of the shifting sand, and the sand continually shifts on Sable Island, the good folks, the lightkeeper and his family that were residing on the bottom floor just simply had to keep moving upstairs as the sand kept building up. And in fact, that's 40 stories high, I'm told. I'm not quite sure of that. But nonetheless, Mr. Speaker, that would be my concern on behalf of the Federation of Agriculture as to whether or not the NDP did in fact consult. I'll take a chance and trust that they have. I'll take a chance and trust that they have, and we will be supporting the legislation. Thank you.
Thank you. If I recognize the honourable member, it will be closed debate. The honourable member from Halifax-Citadel, Sable Island.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I want to thank the members of this House for their support of this bill and particularly the motives underpinning it. In particular, I would like to thank the Minister of Tourism, Culture and Heritage for his kind gesture in giving me the flag that flew over Sable Island at one time. It was a very generous thing to do, and I will treasure it. And I will take a photograph of it and post it on my website so that people will know that it's the only direct contact I have with Sable Island up to now. And I know the Minister of Environment and Labour will want to take me up on my offer to go with him to Sable Island and to assess the environment there and the potential that there may be there to study, to look at some of the great work that's going on there at the research station and how the Department of Environment and Labour can in fact support that very valuable research. I know he and I have talked about that possibility, and I look forward to some further discussions with him about this subject. I do want to speak to the member for Digby about his assessment of the number of horses on Sable Island. Mr. Speaker, the information I have is from the research station there. There are 250 to 300 horses there, and it's in fine balance. And certainly, I would encourage him to come to their conference in March 2009, where they talk about the specific research and their findings on Sable Island. As you know. I also like to thank the member for Kings North for his offer to distribute the video to that all of the members on the opposite side have and on this side have to schools, and to encourage students and teachers to talk about Sable Island and to view this video. And I would encourage certainly the members to consider that as one alternative, and I certainly would encourage them to view it. Anyway, I just wanted to close by thanking the members for their support, and with that, Mr. Speaker, I move second reading of Bill 227, an act to declare the Sable Island horse to be the provincial horse of Nova Scotia. Thank you.
Thank you. The motion before the House is for second reading on Bill number 227, the Provincial Horse Act. Is the House ready for the question? Question has been called. Would all those in favour of the motion please say aye. Aye. Contrary-minded nay. Motion carried.
Bill 227, entitled An Act to Declare the Sable Island Horse to be the provincial horse of Nova
Or that
Scotia.
this bill be referred to the Committee on Law Amendments. The Honourable the Deputy Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would you please call Bill number 225, the Provincial Sport Act?
Bill number 225, the Provincial Sports Act. Chair recognizes the Honourable Member for Hants West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'm pleased to rise to make a few opening comments, take a few minutes. We won't be talking about ghosts, I don't think, or horses too much, but you never know as we move along here. But, you know, Mr. Speaker, hockey's an important game in this province. Did a little research and checking last year. Hockey or Sport Nova Scotia claims there were over 18,000 men, women, and boys and girls playing the sport. And I know that there are many, many hours. I don't know how many hours that takes in the run of a year, but we play now from, I guess, in August things start up and hockey schools are underway, and I guess all year round, maybe in some places the game continues in the province. But we have a lot of things going on. Certainly where I'm from, we would claim to be the birthplace of hockey, although we're not debating that today. We have a lot of facts that were certainly put forward by a number of historians and Thomas Chandler Halliburton, obviously writing about the days on Long Pond, and Garth Vaughan, who did a great deal of work in history and writing about, I think it was called The Puck Starts Here, and gave great detail of the game. And although he may not have agreed on which pond it began on at the time, I think there's a Percy Paris Black, is that what he's saying over there? There is agreement that the game did start locally, certainly in the Windsor area, and I think we would all agree in this House in Nova Scotia. So it's important that we bring this bill forward to recognize that game. I remember as a kid, we couldn't wait to get home from school, and it wouldn't matter if it was summer or winter. We played the game of hockey. In wintertime, as soon as we got in, we'd be out on a pond. We had a pond in our backyard, Mr. Speaker, and the kids from the neighborhood would all come, and we would play until Mother hollered at us to come in long after supper hour had passed. And that was a daily event where I grew up. And in the summertime, we formed leagues and we traveled around from communities. You don't see that anymore too much now, but we would go from one community to the other, playing different groups and individuals, and we had it organized, and we played right in the streets in the different communities. And those community folks supported us a great deal as that went on, and had little tournaments, and we played in the high school yards or wherever we could. And recently I noticed in the mornings I drop my kids off to elementary school in Windsor every once in a while, and every single morning that I do that, just across from the school, there's a group of kids in their driveway that have the nets out and the goalie gear on, and they're playing hockey before they go to school. And I know these kids, and they all play minor hockey right now. I guess it's a good start to their day, but it's a regular occurrence. Everywhere we go, we see hockey, and it doesn't matter what community we're in, there are people that are playing the game. And that's good to see. You know, it's great exercise for them, and it's a long love of the game. And all of these kids, probably just like myself, had days when we dreamed of scoring the big goal. And I know other honourable members in this House have played the game. Some are still playing it. I know that the Minister of Health Promotion and Protection as his aging allows him, he's still enjoying the game. And he's not that good, I'm told, but he plays. And we all have our favorite teams. But you know, Mr. Speaker, we're very fortunate in this province. We host two Quebec Major Junior teams, one in Cape Breton, the Screaming Eagles, of course, having a good season this year, and the Mooseheads as well, who have been very popular over the years in that league. We have our own Junior Bs and A teams and so on throughout the province. Our own Windsor Rolls last year took the provincial and then the maritime title. Not off to such a great start this year. They're rebuilding. I guess that happens after you have the big year, but good to see just the same. But, you know, in this province as well, Mr. Speaker, we've seen some great NHL players. You know, Al McGuinness from Cape Breton, probably still the record for the hardest slap shot in the NHL. Our own Glenn Murray from down the South Shore. I'm not sure if Glenn's back on the ice or not this year, but a lot of years in Boston. We have Colin White out of New Glasgow, certainly a Stanley Cup winner. Joey McDonald, just about to mention him, from Pictou. He's playing with the New York Islanders. I believe he's a goaltender there for the New York Islanders. And John Sim is also playing with the Islanders, I believe, at the present time. So nice to see those people and the talent coming out of this province, Mr. Speaker. In years past, we've hosted the NHL farm clubs, the Voyageurs, albeit they were, you know, the team for the Hebs. And myself not being a Hebs fan, that's, you know, that's okay. We put some good players through this province in Nova Scotia. I am a Maple Leaf fan. There's no question about that. And I can say this. We have a lot of support for the Maple Leafs in this house. There's no doubt about that. That's for sure, and I know other teams as well. And I think it's been a while since they've won the Stanley Cup, but if you look on the cup, you'll see where they won it many years before. They'll win it again. But I always look at that and say, well, they're giving other teams, Mr. Speaker, the opportunity to get their name affixed to that cup, and that's why they're holding off. But I'm sure, again, matter of fact, I pray the odd time in my lifetime I'll see their name go back on the cup. But they're off to a good start as well, Mr. Speaker. This province, you know, hockey, we live it and we breathe it at times, and I know families that go one way with one child and one way with another just to make the games, and the boys and the girls are playing and having a great time. Not only in Windsor, but all over Nova Scotia. Mr. Speaker, I know everyone here would be familiar that we hosted the World Hockey, the men's hockey, this past year, and phenomenal crowds, great time, great opportunity to see talent come to not only to Canada, but specifically Nova Scotia. And it was interesting when we looked at a little bit of research that Hockey Canada has a website that had over 2 million hits on it. In the last year, and I would say that hundreds of thousands of them probably came from right here in Nova Scotia, given our interest. But CBC a few years back, Don Cherry was here and Ron McLean, and I think it was 2002, maybe 2003, I forget the year. They were here for the CBC Hockey Day in Canada, and they hosted that out of Windsor. They were on Long Pond, or the cradle of hockey, on the Dill property, and were on the skates and played and did numerous interviews and filmed the game. We had the longest day of hockey that went on throughout that period, and of course did their regular annual games that they played, showed the NHL games at night, and they kept coming back to Windsor where they hosted it from. So that was a lot of excitement around our area as well. But you know, Mr. Speaker, the kids that play this game have interesting enough developed over the years, the talent. We've seen it change from the time that I played hockey. I didn't join organized hockey until I was probably 10 or 11 years old in Windsor, and played minor hockey for a number of years and up through junior and so on. But we keep seeing every year, for whatever reason, and maybe they're working harder at it because of the love of the game. They're out there, they're working hard, the boys, the girls both, and they are developing skills that are phenomenal. And we see that in the Canadian championships that we've won, both men's and women's, the talent that goes around the world and plays and represents this country. And as I've already mentioned, some of the names that come from this province, wonderful talent that comes from this province. But I don't want to take a lot of time, Mr. Speaker. I know we have other things on the agenda this afternoon, and I think there's probably a couple of others that want to speak to this. Or at least I hope there is others that want to speak to this. And with that, I'm pleased to open the debate on Bill number 225. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. The honourable member from Waverley Fall River, Beaverbank.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I think, I mean, I could just literally stand up here for hours and talk about hockey in Nova Scotia, and more particularly referencing the town of Windsor. Windsor, where I was born, and I'm going to take you on a little bit of a short journey, very, very short. And where I lived and where the family homestead still is today in the town of Windsor, if you ever go to Mount Murtock on a skiing trip, when you take that exit, that Garland's Cross exit, and come towards Mount Murtock, which would be on the Route 14. That's opposite Route 14. There's a little street called Cottage Street. And at the end of that street, they say the toughest people on the street lived at the end of the street. And we were the last house on the street, Mr. Speaker. And I've got to say, Mr. Speaker, I was next to the baby in the family, so the road was somewhat paved for me. So that's, and if anyone's familiar with that area is, it's called Curry's Corner. It's referred to as Curry's Corner, not too far from the site of Long Pond that's now well documented. And again, as the member from Hants West said, we're not here to debate Long Pond as the birthplace of hockey, but more about hockey and the role it's played in the life of Nova Scotians. The member from Hants West really got my juices flowing because he was mentioning some names from the town of Windsor, and I can remember some names that are very, very familiar to him because I can remember watching his father play hockey. I can remember he was a goalie. He reminded me a little bit of Gump Worsley. Probably about the maybe I don't think he was as tall as the Gumper, but he was certainly a goaltender that had the admiration of a lot of people because I've seen him go out and get cut and get almost one game get almost knocked unconscious, but stayed in the game. I also one of the ice heroes that I had, and I know this name will ring a bell to the member from Hants West, and a gentleman that had particularly good hockey skills, just an excellent defenseman, and is also a member of the Hockey Heritage Hall of Fame in Windsor, and that was Howie Fish. Howie Fish, who is, I think he's your uncle, if I'm not mistaken, who was probably, I used to just admire the way that this gentleman played hockey, and I can remember as a kid, I'd watch him, and you know how you develop heroes, and he was certainly one of the many heroes that I developed. I can remember that growing up, it was almost like in the town of Windsor, when growing up there, and I think this was for male and females because they also had female hockey teams in the Windsor area in 1920s and before that. But I can remember it was almost like a given. It was a tradition that if you played on any of the hockey teams in Windsor, that there was a tradition that you had to uphold, and that was the win. And we used to win championships year after year. I remember one year playing minor hockey in the town of Windsor, and in 1 year I was on a team that won 3 championships. And I shouldn't say I was on a team that won 3 championships, but I won 3 championships. I played Pee-wee, went from Pee-wee to midget, from midget to juvenile, all in the same year, because in those days, if you didn't have enough players on your juvenile team, you could move up to make out a full complement for a team. And so there were some of us that were fortunate enough that got to play at 2 or 3 levels in one season. And it was just, and you know, when I think of Windsor, and I could name, Ernie Mosier, anyone that's ever followed hockey at all and wants to go back many, many, many years ago, certainly before my time, the name Ernie Mosier will ring a bell. I can remember names like after the Ernie Mosiers, the Mosiers, Kill Cups, certainly in my era, names like Randy Jake Miller, who went on and played professional hockey for over a dozen years. Guys like Joe Hummer Robinson, who went on to the pro ranks. I played hockey on a high school team, in the 60s that won the Nova Scotia championship. And I would say that of those members of that team, I would say, and this is an estimate, I would say probably 75% of us went on to play varsity hockey at some university here in Canada. And so there's such a legacy. But one of the things that always impressed me, and I should take a look around the house because I was looking to see if Bob Fowler was in the house, because Bob Fowler, also from Windsor, would be well known by the members opposite, was better than a decent hockey player himself. A good hockey player. He wasn't quite as good as I was, but he was a decent hockey player. Better than decent. So now, I know when I think of Windsor and I think about throughout all of Nova Scotia, all those leagues that we used to have, and in around Windsor, there would be the old rural league. There would be the shore league, and where we'd have teams from Kennecook, from Tennecape, from Gore. I can remember we, as kids, we'd be playing against adults. And when I refer to those of us that lived in town, we'd be playing midget, and we played in the Shore League. We traveled to East Hants to play in the East Hants League. But it was just a great experience. But what really impressed me, I think, about hockey, and about hockey in the province of Nova Scotia, and particularly reference to Windsor, was that there was a bond there. There was a bond there. Even that bond extended to the fans that used to come out and watch you play. And every time we come to the city, or as we got older and we went off to universities, or we went out into the workplace, people would always identify with you. Oh, they could say, well, I seen you play, or I played with you, or I played against you, or I watched you play in New Glasgow, or I seen a game up in Cape Breton where you were playing for the championship. So there's a legacy that sport can provide, and particularly, I think, that for us as Canadians and as Nova Scotians, that particular sport is hockey. For Americans, it may be football, it may be baseball, but certainly for Canada and for Nova Scotians, it is hockey. I was mentioning some names, and I mentioned if you gave reference to the sports Heritage Center in Windsor, and when I think of the name Ernie Mosier, I can remember a big event. A big event in the town of Windsor was when Fleming McKell, who toured, called Fleming McKell's All-Stars. Now, Fleming McKell won a scoring championship with the Boston Bruins in the National Hockey League. And he came to Nova Scotia, and he was playing in the old Nova Scotia Senior League. And he played with New Glasgow, and they toured. They toured the Maritimes, and I can remember the night that they played in Windsor. And I don't know if I've ever mentioned this, but one of the biggest thrills in my life was not only watching the game, but after the game, when I returned to my house, and in my house were 3 members from that team sitting there talking to my dad. I can remember Scotty Bowman, who at one time was a scout with the Montreal Canadiens, coming to my house. I came home from school, and Scotty Bowman in my house talking to my father about his children, and my brother, my older brother, going on at the age of 15 for trial camp with the Montreal Canadiens. Mr. Speaker, look, without a doubt, I could go on and on and on about the legacy of hockey here in the province of Nova Scotia. There's one person I have to mention who was probably instrumental in so many people in the town of Windsor and beyond, because he certainly reached out and touched a lot of people when it came to the game of hockey, and that is Murray Moe Smith. Murray Moe Smith at one time was minor hockey in Windsor. If it hadn't have been for Murray Moe Smith, there are a lot of kids that wouldn't have got to play hockey, period. And how he ever did this, I don't know. I can remember in those days, what we used to have what we would call the house league. And then what you would do is you would pick an all-star team from the house league, which would be your rep team. Very, very much, which would be, I guess, your AAA midget if you were playing midget house and whatever the case may be, which they don't. It sort of gave you something to aspire to and to shoot for. But there were so many names. I mentioned the name. I could mention the name Boyd, Redden, Dill. Armstrong, all names, Rogers, Spence, Keith, McPherson, Phillips, Cochran, Bishops, all names that are synonymous with hockey in the town of Windsor. And I know there are many hockey players, certainly in this house. I hear that the member from Colchester, Musquodoboit Valley, carries a pretty mean stick, and I hear it's a mean stick. We also have a member from Shelburne who I guess if you go in the corner with him, you know that you've been there. Now, that's what he says anyway, Mr. Speaker. There's people like Foley. And I was mentioning earlier, there are some people that maybe were not the best hockey players on the team, but they competed. And sometimes that's what it's all about. You don't have to be the best, but get out there and compete. And I know certainly some people that I grew up with that competed in the game of hockey. And I remember one gentleman who's still one of my best friends, who is now the president of the Shaw Group of Companies, Bert Frizzell, who was a very, very fierce competitor on the ice. Just an excellent gentleman. I think of some teachers. I think of the name Whalen. Again, it was just the whole idea of competing, and because hockey goes beyond just that competitiveness upon the ice. A lot of it is that takes part in the dressing room, leading up to the game and after the game. Yeah. So, how long have I been? So, Mr. Speaker, there's all kinds of things. There's been a book written by the Fossey brothers who have roots here in Canada. The Fossey brothers, now out of the U.S., who wrote a book called Black Ice. And hockey in Nova Scotia has played a very, very prominent and important role in race relations in the province of Nova Scotia. My father was the first person to play on a white hockey team in the province of Nova Scotia. And indeed, he's the first person thus far that we know of, and according to the Fossey research, that ever played with a white team certainly in Canada. And how he got to play as a teenager. He would travel with the team, and in those days they wouldn't let blacks play hockey with white players. He would have been in his he would have been 13, 14, and the team from Windsor would show up at a rink in the valley, and they'd say, "Well, look, we don't have enough players. Would you mind if our stick boy played?" And he's not much of a hockey player, but would you mind if he played, or else if he can't play, then we can't play you because we don't have enough players. And of course, the consensus of the opposing team would be, well, yes, he can play. And then, of course, there would be a little bit of a hubbub when John Buster Parrish would come out on the ice as a young child, and then he would show his skills. And I can remember a little story. I'm just going to tell you one little story about. I got an older brother, John, who coaches in the Junior A League now, but also played professional hockey. And when he went and played in the Quebec League, and his first year and his first game, he was playing, and the coach put him out. And this is well documented in the Quebec papers. My father used to keep all the clippings. The coach put him out on the ice to kill a penalty. And John went out on the ice to kill a penalty, and he ragged the puck for full 2 minutes. And he never let anybody touch the puck. And he comes to the bench, and the coach starts scolding him and shaking his finger at him. And he says, "Well," he says, "what's that all about, coach?" And the coach says, "Well, why didn't you put the puck in the net?" And John innocently responded to the coach, "Well, coach," he says, "you didn't tell me to score. You told me to go out and kill the penalty." So I know when I talk about hockey, I can remember my good friend behind me from Timberley Prospect, and I'm glad I've seen him on the ice, and I'm glad he made his fame on the football field. So I would say that that Bill 225, Mr. Speaker, is a very worthy bill, and it will go a long way towards everything that we here in Nova Scotia stand for. And I want to thank the member opposite for bringing it forward. And with that, I'll take my seat.
Almost to speak on Bill 225. which was sponsored today by the member from West Hants. And if I might use a well-worn phrase, I'm going to rag the puck for a few minutes on this particular bill, and perhaps say a few things about part of this province that didn't get too much attention so far in the bill, but I'm sure that we respect the fact that somebody took the initiative, and that somebody was the member from West Hants to bring this bill to the House, and I congratulate him for that, because I think it's an important thing to recognize where we come from in this province in regards to hockey. And as some of my colleagues from Cape Breton would know, I literally grew up with hockey as a rink rat in the Sydney Forum. And some would say that I was raised in the coal bin of the Forum because we lived next door. And as such, and as a rink rat, that was a prized position to have when I was growing up. Of course, you didn't have to pay to get in the rink, and you got all kinds of ice time when there was nobody else paying for the ice time. And we would get free time on Friday nights and play under the milk bottle, which had a light in it, and that's the only light we had to play at midnight on Friday night for a couple of hours. And you got away with a lot when you were playing under the light of a milk bottle, that's for sure. But anyway, the all through school, I had the opportunity to be a rink rat in Sydney, the old Sydney Forum, which is, of course, as you know, has been replaced by Centre 200. But in the old Sydney Forum, it was a historic building because it housed something like 2,000 seats, maybe, and it